One of the things I really hate or despise is politicized medicine. This is in CNN. This just came out yesterday on the 14th of May. Look at this. This is all in the context of a big, heavily political article about Rick Bright. I'm not going to wade into the politics. I don't do politics. Politics isn't my thing. As a quick reminder, I don't do left-right. I do up-down. My up-down is integrity. I'm seeking to operate in and with as much integrity as possible. The ideological rigidity thing that's on the bottom of that whole thing, I don't do that. But I do believe some of these studies, I gotta confess, my best explanation for them is that to harken back to the opening email of the day, it's not really bad science. I think it has some other explanation, and I think politics is cutting into some of this stuff. Sad to say, but at any rate, that's speculating. Here's what we do know. CNN writes it thusly. On Monday, a study of more than 1,400 COVID-19 patients in New York was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the largest such examination to date, which found that hydroxychloroquine gave no benefit to COVID-19 patients and instead significantly increased their risk of cardiac arrest. Oh, that sounds awful. We'll call that study 1. We're going to look into that one in just a second. Monday's JAMA study followed a New England Journal of Medicine study that was published last week that concluded hydroxychloroquine neither helped nor harmed 1,376 patients who were admitted to New York Presbyterian Columbia University Medical Center between March 7th to April 8th. We'll call that study number 2. As a result of these studies, Dr. William Schaffner, an infectious disease expert, said the nail has virtually been put in the coffin of hydroxychloroquine, which will make this man, Dr. Fauci, very happy because, of course, then HCQ will not compete with his favorite star, remdesivir, which, by the way, doesn't really seem to do all that much. I looked at all the clinical data, and I got to confess, at best, that's sort of a squint at it, kind of maybe sort of thing. And they gave that one every possible benefit of the doubt, controlling for timing, controlling all the dosing, all of that stuff. And it still came up kind of questionable. So let's look at study number 1. Here's study number 1. This came out on May 11th. All but guaranteed to fail. This one was. All but guaranteed to fail. So this is pulling from the study. Let's look into it. This one's called Association of Treatment with Hydroxychloroquine or Azithromycin with in-hospital mortality. So they're looking at death in patients with COVID-19 in New York State. All right, let's dive in here. Hospital outcomes by treatment are presented in Table 2, noting 45 or 3.1% of patients were still hospitalized at the time of final analysis, so I guess they're excluded. Patients receiving hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin, that's 30.7%, and HCQ alone, which was 19.2%, had higher levels of ICU admission than those receiving azithromycin alone, which is only 10%, and neither drug. So gosh, if you were given hydroxychloroquine or azithromycin or HCQ alone, you had higher levels of ICU admission. Gosh. Well, first question, were these drugs administered in a randomized, double-blinded method? Nope. These patients came in and somebody made a decision. We're going to give you something. Okay, now let's check this out. Although, they do mention here, 56.1% of patients in all groups entered intensive care within 1 day of admission. We can't look at any of this stuff. More than half, nearly 60% of patients in all groups entered intensive care within 1 day of admission. I'm sorry. Somebody was just, Hail Marying a little, some drug treatments to people who were right at death's door, so to speak, or right into the ICU's door. Similarly, does it get worse? More patients receiving hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine alone than those taking azithromycin alone and neither drug received mechanical ventilation. What? Hold on. How do you control for something like that? You can't. Come on. Stop. Right there. So more patients receiving HCQ and HCQ plus than those taking azithro alone and neither drug received mechanical ventilation. So look at this. The people who were on, and this supports my Hail Mary hypothesis, people receiving hydroxychloroquine and plus azith, 27% of them received mechanical ventilation. And hydroxychloroquine alone, 18.8%. got mechanical ventilation. Only 6.2% and 8.1% received mechanical ventilation. So my guess here is that the people who were, as they say, people who are more seriously ill tended to be put on these drugs. So that's a super confounding factor. I don't know how statistically you'd tease that apart. I'd love to talk to somebody who could really tear that apart. And look, here, let's go to the last sentence. Among patients undergoing mechanical ventilation and receiving HCQ plus Z, or HCQ alone, or Z alone, 49.6% were ventilated before or concurrent with starting these treatments. We're out. Right there. No good. That's bogus right there. Okay. You got to start the treatment early. By the time, if you're saying half of the people who went on either azithromycin, HCQ, or both of them together, that half of them were ventilated before or concurrent with starting these treatments, no, you can't possibly tear through the data and correct for that and then come up with a thing that says, there's no way to interpret these results. I'm so sorry, but you can't take an somebody on Twitter the other day said, hey, airbags were administered in the hospital to car crash victims after they were brought into the hospital, and it's been determined that airbags don't work. Did you follow that? Right? That's really what they're saying here. They're saying an antiviral that really only works before people get super seriously sick doesn't work when we give it to them after they're already ventilated. And I'm here to say, yeah, that's not too terribly surprising, really, honestly. It just isn't. So that doesn't surprise me. All right. But at least study one was honest about the limitations. So I love this part. This is where honest researchers, I think, really show themselves and reveal themselves. So down at the bottom of this study, they did have limitations. It says, this study has several limitations. First, in sampling first hospitalizations, possible readmissions to other facilities may not be captured. Okay, that's fair. Second, mortality was limited to in-hospital death, and patients discharged were assumed to still be alive during the study period. Okay, that could confound things if everybody went home and died. That would obviously change the conclusions here. No data that happened, of course. Third, some potential confounders, such as inflammatory markers associated with severity of COVID-19 in prior studies, were not frequently measured and not available for modeling. So they didn't know how far along some of these people were based on inflammatory markers. But here's where number 4 is the one that I want to lean on a little bit here. Fourth, the rapidity with which patients entered the ICU and underwent mechanical ventilation, often concurrently with initiating HCQ and Z, rendered these outcomes unsuitable for efficacy analyses. There it is. It did indeed render these unsuitable for efficacy analyses, particularly if your endpoints were mechanical ventilation and death, right? And finally, fifth, adverse events were collected as having occurred at any point during hospitalization, potentially before drug initiation, although both medications were started on average within 1 day of admission. Future studies should examine the onset of these events relative to drug timing. Yes, timing. Timing is really important. But let's go back here for a second. Rendered these outcomes unsuitable for efficacy analyses. You got to be able to see that and read that and know what you're reading when you see that. But I expect that from our doctors. And I would especially expect that from a doctor who's billed as an infectious disease expert. Hey, Dr. William Schaffner, I don't know how you can say the nail has virtually been put in the coffin of hydroxychloroquine based on study 1, which has the limitation of not being suitable for an efficacy analysis. Okay? Bad. That's a fail right there. Okay. There are 2 key variables for HCQ. Zinc is one, time is the other. Let's go into study number 2 and see where that brings us. Okay. This is actually another poorly designed study. I'll show you why. This came out May 7th. So this is study number 2, where they were saying here, neither helped nor harmed all these patients. And so this is the prime conclusion here at least in CNN. I have a different conclusion. Once again, we'll lead off by noting that when we do a search for zinc, no zinc anywhere in this entire document. So it's not discussed either to say why they're not discussing it or why they didn't study it. But check this out. So 1,446 consecutive patients, 70 intubated, died, or discharged within 24 hours after presentation, therefore excluded from the analysis. All right. They had a remaining 1,376 patients. During a median follow-up of 22.5 days, they found 811, so that was 59%, I'll round up there, received HCQ, which was 600 milligrams twice a day, BID on day 1, and then 400 milligrams daily for median of 5 days, so 6 total days of treatment there. 45%, I'll round up, 46% of the patients were treated within 24 hours after presentation to the emergency department, so okay. And 86% within 48 hours, which means 14% weren't given anything within 48 hours. So I would consider excluding those as well. But here we go again. Ready? Hydroxychloroquine-treated patients were more severely ill at baseline than those who did not receive hydroxychloroquine. So again, Hail Mary pass. The more seriously ill patient gets the drug. Also at a too late moment. And at that point, it didn't work. And then they write a big paper that says, hey, it didn't work. And we're all supposed to shoot our eyebrows up in complete surprise and say, wow, that's insane. How did that happen? Median ratio of partial pressure of arterial oxygen to the fraction of inspired oxygen was 223 versus 360. Oh my God, that's just a giant gap. 223 versus 360. So the HCQ treated patients were really, really seriously ill compared to the other people in this story. All right. Overall, 346 patients had a primary endpoint event. So in this case, it was either intubation or death or both. And 166 died without intubation. So 180 died, were intubated, 66 died, 166 died without intubation. In the main analysis, there was no significant association between HCQ use and intubation or death. So they said, yeah, it didn't really work. All right. Obviously, it didn't really work, but I'm really surprised that you said there was no difference because I'd have to see how they actually ran their statistics because that's insane. But study 2, where was it really falling short? I went looking for their discussion of limitations. This is the only thing I found. There was just one word of limitation here. This is it. This is the whole thing. They didn't have an entire limitations section. Well, let's sort of dig through this real quick. In the main analysis, a multivariable regression model with inverse probability weighting according to blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I'm just bored. I can't be bothered with that. So despite this extensive adjustment, yeah, I'll bet it was extensive, it is still possible that some amount of unmeasured confounding remains. Here's where they get down to it. Additional limitations of our study include missing data for some variables and potential for inaccuracies in the electronic health record, such as lack of documentation of smoking and coexisting illness. What? Okay, so never mind. Listen, you want to know what the main limitation of your study was? It was that it wasn't randomized because the more severely ill patients got the drug. So pretty much impossible we're going to be able to get anything out of that. It failed because your limitation of your study was they didn't give the HCQ in a timely fashion. And a big limitation of your study was you didn't understand that zinc was an important part of this overall story. And you didn't even talk about the fact that you didn't know about that. So I put all that together and I say a couple of things. First, yeah, the nail has virtually been put in the coffin of hydroxychloroquine, which is going to lead me to say that Dr. William Schaffner may be an awesome infectious disease expert, but he's a clinical numbskull. He doesn't understand how to read clinical stuff, so I will put that right out there. And 2, CNN is very, very, very heavily slanting all of this, and I think they're doing it for politicized reasons because here they are discussing these things in the context of a very, very political moment with this person who is being put forward as a whistleblower against Trump and Trump's administration. All that may be true and yada, yada. I don't do left, right. Doesn't bother me in the slightest. But the science behind this bothers me a lot because this is bad science and bad conclusions.